Okay, good morning. We're the Ayin Beis. We're reviewing now. We're learning now the Tafresh Tzaddik Dalet, which is based on the Ayin Beis, Volume 2, page 1155 through 1157, and we're in Tzaddik Dalet on page 116. And what we're discussing is the first level of bittul, the bittul of the oyer, which we're calling hedet fisis mokim. That means it doesn't have any standing, it doesn't have any value, self-value in the presence of, due to its being connected and sensing the presence of its source. It's mashpia. And the Frierdiker Rebbe, taking off where the Rebbe Rashab, cited the expression, the Keser, the Maimer in the Zohar that says Keser Elyon or Kisri law, even though it's a great, high, primordial, and powerful light, nevertheless, Ucham, it's darkened and considered like dark in the presence of Kodam compared to the cause of causes, Ilis Ilis. And he's explaining what this word Ucham means. It doesn't just mean that it's not bright. In other words, it's like the absence of light in the presence of a greater light. That it's actually the opposite of light. That's what he's saying here. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
And see me as well?
No, I can't see you.
You stop moving. I mean, it froze a little, but I can hear you. So
Hey, you hear you? See you.
Okay.
Now I see you.
I don't know what it is. Yeah. Okay. As long as you could hear me, that's the main thing. And he says, the second mimer he brings that kol nuhuroyin, all the lights, mischashachoyin kamei, are darkened before him. So we're middle of explaining what that means. Now, when you talk about what he called and cheshech, yom and laila, light and dark, that's what we're discussing. Something that is the antithesis of gilui is what happens to Keser when it's in the presence of its source, its mashpia. So to understand this, he said, "V'yuven I'm just reviewing on page 116, we will understand this according to the known principle, klal hayedua, that a gili, l'gabe atzmei, is a helam l'gabe azulas. Something that's revealed within you is concealed from the other, and the other way around as well. That which is revealed to the other is concealed from you. What does this mean? So he says it's referring to the mashpia makabel, the mashpia and the makabel. That the gili by the mashpia is a helam, a concealment by the makabel, by the recipient. And the gili by the recipient, that which is revealed by the recipient, is a concealment by the mashpia. Now, he didn't explain what this means. It emerges, what it means develops as the idea continues to be discussed here. And then he said, again, I'm just reviewing this whole thing because it's a little dense, but the point is pretty clear. To move on, the Eina Dema Kavana B'Teichen Anesa, when you say Gilia Helam, that is a very different meaning, or it's not comparable, the meaning of Gilia and Helam by the Mashpia and the way it is by the Makabel. So even though Seichel in general, whoever is conceiving or understanding an idea, whether it's a teacher or a student, a Mashpia or Makabel, a great Chacham or a small Chacham, there's a etched in process the way God set it up, a Chei Kavua, that it works in a certain order of all conceptions. They're called his scholar, his chakmus, havona v'asage. basically 2 levels in Chachma and 2 levels in Bina, apparently. So there's a certain way this works. Nevertheless, there's a fundamental difference the way it works by the Mashpia and the way it works by the Makabel. Eifan achel legamri is the word he uses. It's a completely different manner how they both work. And he brings a few points, 2 points. V'hainu, he said, besides the fact, point number 1 is that the Mashpia is higher and a greater level than the Makabel. He says, Chalukim, b'mailas keiches agluyim b'askola v'asaga. They're different in the quality of their, in the level of their revealed faculties of intelligence and comprehension. So on the first level, he's speaking here on the level of ribui and miut. Now one knows more than the other. The mashpia has more knowledge, has conceived more ideas, has many more ways of understanding something. That's why he's a mashpia. Which this is, you can say, is primarily an element of quantity. Even though in seichel, quantity is also associated with quality, but still this point of the mashpia knowing more than the makabel, than the recipient, is primarily more of a quantity thing. To bring proof that quantity and quality are connected in seichel, he brings chochma and bina. He says chochma and bina. That chochma is the nekuda. Yeah. Oh no. One second.
Is off or is it me?
No, something wrong here. I'm just checking things out. Not sure what the problem is. You guys are there?
Now it's good.
Now it's
Okay, I don't know. Something happened. I'm not sure what it was exactly. Okay. But you heard me till Chachma and Bina. I was talking about Chachma and Bina?
Yes.
Okay. So he says the following. Chachma is compared to a mayon, a spring of water where it primarily emits drop by drop. So it's a drop, but it's a very concentrated and intense, powerful drop. Bina is compared to a river. A river is expansive, but it's not as concentrated and doesn't have the quality level of Chachma. So what he says is, what does Bina do? Bina takes the nekuda, the concentrated point of Chachma, and breaks it down, crumbles it into many parts and branches and subcategories and theories. So all the arichas, the whole development of Bina is within Chachma. So what do we see from this? The Bina misachas ima echas the Chachma. So we see from this that though Bina is kamus, because what it's really doing is expanding, it's not creating, it's not conceiving, and yet it's misachas ima echas the Chachma. It relates to the quality of Chachma. It's not just a basically like a onion chopper that chops something into parts. It has a connection with the Chachma. That's the words he used. So we see from this that Chachma and Bina, that the different levels of Seichel, even though soon we're going to learn that the Mashpia Makabel, the Mashpia goes from Chachma to Bina and the Makabel goes from Bina to Chachma, but they have a relationship with each other. So what do we establish from all this? That the first difference between Mashpia and Makabel is one more of quantity, even though it has association with quality. That the mashpia has more knowledge, more chachma, more bina. Malkol Mokim, he says, nevertheless, ribui amiyat is still primarily quantity, even though it has association with quality. And haskola, the whole inyan of intelligence is a qualitative thing. Intelligence isn't just a quantitative element, it's a qualitative. Im kain, so therefore, when we say that a mashpia is superior to makabel, to say that it's just a matter that he knows more, because where's the quality in that? Yes, we said it's associated with quality, but where's the true qualitative difference between mashpia and makabel if one simply knows more than the other, which also brings some quality? So that's why he says, Ki'im ma'losei atzmi, the true or the core superiority of a mashpia makabel is not in the amount of knowledge, but in the actual goof, the etzem eifan haskolos v'hasagas mashpia, the very body, the very essence of how he conceives and understands an idea. So the first distinction we said, the mashpia has a quality over the has a superiority over the recipient, due primarily to quantity, which has some measure of quality to it. That's how it is. When you know more knowledge, you also have more quality. But we haven't spoken about his fundamental superiority. What is the fundamental one? That he actually thinks in a different way. He conceives and understands. That's what makes him a mashpia. He's qualitatively different. And what is the difference? He says, the mashpia, I'm reading around 3/4 of the way down now. The mashpia, ikiru askola v'asoga ba'etzem. By the mashpia, his primary cognitive skill, his primary intelligence is the conceiving and the understanding in the etzem of the idea, in the core root of a concept. And that's why, I'll just read inside already, might as well read it again. And due to that, the way he conceives and understands something is that hu Hashem and nakuda, from the root core of an idea, bo lahispastus. From there, he comes to the extension of the idea. I gave the example in the last class, like for example, dealing with symptoms or dealing with the root of something. A chacham, a person who's really experienced a mashpia in this language here, is someone that understands the core essence of an idea, not just its manifestations and its expressions, so-called its symptoms. But the makabel, here's the fundamental qualitative difference. His primary his primary understanding is in the extension of the idea, because he's just beginning to learn it. And that's why his manner of comprehending something is the other way around, from the bottom up, or from the outside in, instead of from the inside out.
You have
from understanding the details, he then extends and is drawn to a nimshach, and then from there he travels to the Nakuda Sadova.
Example, you have.
Let me please do me a favor. Since there's a lot of people in the class, let me just finish the whole thing, because not so everyone could the full picture. And then if anybody has any comment or question, I would just suggest to do that. It's just much more productive. So so he hears from his teacher, from his mashpia, an idea. He hears the details, the way he can relate to it. And from there, he begins to start understanding deeper and deeper, until he comes to a point where he understands the core nakuda, the core spark, or the point of the idea. By the mashpia, it's the other way around. Because of his experience and his knowledge and his just superior quality intelligence, he goes from the nakuda to the pratim. That's what he says right here. So this This is already a qualitative. This is not that he knows more knowledge. He actually thinks about something differently. And I gave the example of the difference between someone who sees the root of an issue and someone who sees the symptoms of an issue. It's only an example. It's not exactly what he says here. He doesn't use the word root, shadish, and symptoms, but it's a good way of looking at things. So, for example, a master in any given area, when they look at something, they look at it with a different set of eyes. Because of their experience and because of their accumulative knowledge and everything they've built up, which makes them a master, in this case a mashpia, they look at something, they see it in its core, not what it's expressed as. So a novice, a beginner looks at something, you see what you see. You don't necessarily see the underlying forces at work. So in the context here, what it appears, he doesn't say the word bina and chachma here, but it looks like what he's saying that from the mashpia's point of view, he conceives from chachma and then he expresses it in bina and explains it to the makabel. And the makabel works from bina back to chachma to get to that nekuda, which then helps us understand why he brought chachma and bina earlier, because he was trying to explain that though bina is really more just expansion, it does have some qualitative relationship with chachma, but its primary role is explaining chachma. It's not coming, bina doesn't come to conceive of new ideas. It's taking nekuda, the mayon, the concentrated point of chachma, and developing it. In that development, there's a relationship between the two. So essentially, this is the qualitative difference. Now, all this is coming to, we didn't yet get to the punchline, which is what he wants to say, that the helam, the gili by the mashpia is a helam by the makabel, and the gili of the makabel is a helam by the mashpia. But he's building the case, which we'll get to. This is where we stopped on Friday. So before I continue, somebody wants to comment or ask something, now's a good time.
Just ask you before for giving an example, but you mentioned now some example.
Okay, good. Yeah. Sometimes Chassidus explains, just not exactly example for this, but sometimes Chachma and Bina is compared to Riyah and Shmiya, to seeing something and hearing something. You may remember we learned earlier in Ayin Beis that Chachma really is more than just Seichel. It's Hanocha Sichlis. It's a resonating idea. It's the resonance of something that's true. Sometimes it's called Hanocha Saseichel, Riyah Saseichel. What does Riyah mean? When you see something, there's something about it, even if you can't explain it, you just sense a certain truth to it. So let's say somebody sees a beautiful portrait or a beautiful natural scene. So you experience it, and that's that. Then you go and describe it to someone else. They are only hearing it from you. They are only hearing what you saw. So what are they experiencing? So the first difference is Riyah sees the whole picture. Shmiya, the only way you can describe it is detail by detail. You could say, I saw a meadow, I saw a beautiful tree, I saw a sun rising or a sun setting. And from the details, the pratim, Shmiya builds a picture until you can envision, not quite like Riyah Mamish, but you're moving from the details. It's like someone telling you a story that happened. A story has to be told in details, in chapters, in paragraphs. It's a story, it's a narrative. The person who experienced this story, or person who saw it with their own eyes, saw the whole story. When you tell it, you relate it detail by detail. So Shmiya has the chsaron, it doesn't have the hisamtus, that the resonance that Riyah has. On the other hand, the mile of Shmiya actually is that because of the details, you can internalize it more. Someone that sees something may not understand what they saw. Not relevant to our discussion here. I'm just pointing it out. Chachma, as powerful as it is, at the end of the day, it's only a nekuda. You can't build. You need to flesh it out and expand it for it to be able to be a functional intelligence. On the other hand, Bina without Chachma doesn't have the core essence of it all. So in many ways, Riyah is more like the mashpia sees the idea, then explains it as he's telling the story to the makabel. The makabel hears the details, slowly builds, till the makabel can actually reach the level of actually almost like seeing it, or even becoming like the mashpia with enough work. Remember, the mashpia was also once a makabel. So basically, it's a matter of growing. But right now, mashpia and makabel, so the difference between them is not just that one knows more and conceives more and understands more, but there's actually a different way of how they process information. The mashpia works from the inside out, from the nekuda to his pashtus, and the makabel works from his pashtus to the nekuda, which makes total sense. When you start teaching a child Aleph Beis, Torah Tzivilon Moshe, then Pen Chomish Mikra Chumash, then you start teaching him Mishnah. He's going from Aleph Beis Gimel Dalet. First start the letters, then he starts to put letters together, make words out of them. Words become sentences, sentences paragraphs, etc., etc. Whereas the mashpia has already got to that level. He's working the other way around. He knows the nekuda of the whole idea. And now he has to explain it to someone. So he has to bring it down from that core place into an expansive breakdown of details. And therefore he's moving from chachma to bina, like you said, from the etzem nekuda to his pashtus. That's basically what we've learned right now. Now he's going to add one more thing regarding this, which is where we stopped. We'll continue here. So he says the following. The difference between these two approaches is the difference is the difference between these approaches is like the difference between when you say yodeya, you know something, and yodua, it's known. So it's two different expressions. You could say I know it, or the idea is known. So he says here's the difference. When you say Yedeya, this person knows something, they know the core matter. Whatever it is you're discussing, they know the etzem of it. And from knowing the etzem, then he knows all that extends from this etzem. It would be like an example, someone you know very well. Of course, it could be yourself, but I want to use an example. Let's say you know your brother, you know your sister, you know your parent. Then a stranger who never met them, how do they know a person? They have to work from the details to the etzem. You know be'etzem a person, then you can describe the details that this person that I know so intimately and well, let me now describe features of this person. So in some ways, you can never really fully convey someone you personally knew your whole life, and you knew intimately in many different details of their lives, because their life, it's not a sum of the parts. You know the etzem of the thing, of the person in this case, and from there, you then tell the details of the person. A person coming from the other direction, doesn't know the person, has to first look at the details. And then you can get to know that individual to the point of trying to get to know as much as possible the etzem. I just gave an example from human beings, but of course this is also true with anything. A true master scientist or medicine or doctor, talking about a true, or a master l'havdil of Torah. They don't just learn Gemara or halacha from the details. They've gotten to a point they know the core essential point of the Torah, and then it manifests in this detail and that detail. I'll give an example in a moment. Whereas someone who's a beginner goes the other way around. First you learn step by step, and then you get to the core. So that's what he calls yedeya, a knower. Basically a master, a person who knows. The Ragat Shover, for example. I think this is a good example that can help understand this. The Ragat Shover gone, Rabbi Yosef Rosen, the Rebbe cites so often, one of his main chidushim was he was able to strip every halacha and every sugya in Gemara to its core essence, to the point that he was able to connect halachas, that disparate halachas and laws that we would never have connected. I'll just give an example. Like when he talks about, let's say, Shabbos. So there's a question, Shabbos, there's a din. If a person, Rahman al-Islam, God forbid, desecrates Shabbos, do they have to continue to keep Shabbos? Or once you desecrate it, it's desecrated, and therefore Shabbos is no longer Shabbos. Says the Ragat Shover, what's the machlekes? He says the machlekes is how we look at time. If time is made up of parts, so then every moment of Shabbos is sanctified anew. So the fact that something was desecrated a moment before does not in any way affect and compromise the next moment. But if time is one body of Shabbos is called from the moment that Shabbos begins till it ends, it's one solid block of time, then once is compromised, the whole thing has been compromised. Once he brings that concept of time, he suddenly can apply it also to Sfiras Ha'emer. Is Sfiras Ha'emer 49 days one block? Or each day is its own day? We see the halacha is that if you miss one day, you can't continue counting with a bracha. Why not? If it's every day is its own Sfira, why can't you continue? You miss that because it's a block of 49 and number 4 can't be if there's no number 3. I'm not going to go through all the details. Obviously, there are distinctions. And then he takes time and he applies it to the laws of Nida, all kinds of laws that if you initially would say, what's the connection between the law of Sfiras Ha'emer and the laws of Shabbos? But when you can get to the Etzem Nekuda of what the theory is about, what the disagreement is about, or what the idea is about, it changes the whole picture. Very often the Rebbe uses this approach, what he calls a Lishito Saihu. He brings in many places, Shammai goes Basar Koyach, he looks at the potential of something, and Hillel looks at the actual. And then suddenly, because you know that core essential theory of each of them, Shammai is Koyach and Hillel is Poyel, you could apply that to all their disagreements. Chanukah, the end of Mishnah of the Mishnah is about Dvash. And you go on and on. You can explain Tu B'Shvat. Shammai holds it starts on Rosh Chodesh Shvat. Hillel is Tu B'Shvat. Chanukah, Shammai says you count, you light 8 and then you go downward, and on, because you get to the core idea. Then the hystaifus, what he calls hystaifus, the details that emerge from it, then apply in each case. You can apply that same theory to all these different areas. Sometimes Shammai is Gvura and Hillel is Chesed, and that too can apply to their general approach. Basically, a master, a mashpia, is able to get to the core essence of a theory, of an idea, and from there, he already brings it into many different details. The Havdil in science, when they develop a hypothesis, a theory, that explains many different phenomena, it's the same idea. That when you look at a bunch of fragmented phenomena, we don't understand the commonality. But when you get to the core idea and say, here's a principle called gravity, or electromagnetism, or different rules of physics. And with that, you can explain many different elements and movements within the celestial bodies and on Earth. And you see there's a common rule that applies across the board. That's also going from an Etzem Nekuda to his pashtus to his typhus. That's an example. What he's calling that Yedeya. So from Yedeya, he says, you know the Etzem Adover, and from the Etzem, Yedeya Kol HaMestayef Me'etzem Zeh. He knows everything that extends from it. Now, my examples are not perfect, to be honest. They're just examples, because the bottom line, what he's really saying here is that when you know something at its Etzem level, you then know its different expressions. So my example works, but it's not a perfect example. There are other ways you can explain this Etzem and his typhus, but it's one way to explain it. V'yodua, that's Yedeya. How about Yodua when you say it's known? Yodua hu masha etzem hadover eina Yedeya klal. So when you say Yodua, it's known, it's not that you know. Something is known, it's really from the outside in. He's saying, when you say Yodua, that's a Madova is eina Yedeya klal. He does not know the core principle of whatever it is that we're addressing. Rak shemehis pashtus. What does he know? From its expression or its extension. And everything that's derived from that etzem. He knows that there's something at the core from which comes this extension. This is typhus. Typhus is like this branching off, this expression or extension. So basically, one knows the core, that's called Yedeya, and from there, he can move into the extension expression of it. The other knows the extension and expression, and from that he knows there must be somewhere this is coming from. So he could deduce and he could extrapolate that there's an etzem, but he doesn't begin with the etzem. He doesn't know the etzem. Like I said before about human being, you may know somebody, if you know them well, they're etzem, so to speak. And when I say etzem, I mean it loosely. I don't mean etzem anefesh, and I don't mean atzmus. Etzem, I mean relatively, you know their core being. You know what they're made of. So you're not surprised, for example, if you hear someone that you know is a very good person, very kind person, and suddenly you hear they gave a big charitable donation to someone or to an organization. You won't be surprised because you know the person. You know this person is fully capable of it. He's capable, and therefore now he's expressing himself that way. A person who does not know that about the person sees he's generous, so he's seeing his expression. From that, he can deduce that it's coming from somewhere. Now, he doesn't know whether that person is a fundamentally good person. Maybe there's other reasons that he's giving, but he's traveling from the expression. He comes to, as he said, he doesn't know the etzem, but from the expression, the word is, he knows there's something at the core where this is coming from. Okay. Now, again, I said this on Friday, I'll say it again. This is classic Friedrich Rebbe style of writing. If you compare it to Ayin Beis, you see it's a different type of signon, a different type of language that the Friedrich Rebbe uses. And all this is the Friedrich Rebbe. Now he's going to go back to the initial statement about Helam and Gilui of Mashpia and Makabel. Then we're going to go back to Ucham, the Ucham of Keser. So here's what he says. V'zehu gilui legaba mashpia. This is what we said when we said earlier that a gilui by the mashpia is a helam by the makabel. This is what it means. V'zehu gilui legaba mashpia pirushay atzmi. Meaning that which is a gilui by the mashpia is that means what's gilui by the mashpia? Not just the intelligence, the etzem of intelligence. That's the chiddush he addressed now. Not just that the mashpia knows more. Because if he knows more, you could say, okay, he's a higher gili, and the student, the makabel, is a lower gili. But now we're teaching that mashpia's qualitative difference and superior quality is in the fact that he understands the etzem. He knows the etzem. He's a yedeya. So, v'zeu gili legab mashpia, which means pirushe atzmi. Now that's the key word that he added, atzmi, asher helam legab makabel. That's concealed the makabel because the makabel does not see or know the etzem. She'en le'shum beis yad le'ochiz be'klal. He doesn't ever have any handle to grasp this etzem. This is an expression we learned earlier as well. The Friedrich Rebbe used it. Beis yad technically is a handle. It's like on a pitcher. You have the handle on a pitcher. You need something to hold on to. So he's using that as an example. The makabel doesn't have any handle to hold on to and grasp an etzem, because it's not in his domain, fundamentally beyond him. So that which is begili by the mashpia, which is the etzem of the idea, is behelim by the makabel. And what about the other way around? And gili legaba makabel, that which is revealed in context of the makabel, the recipient, what is that? The gili by the mashpia is atzmi. What's begili by the makabel? Shurak is pashtus bilvad. That's only the extension of the idea. Its expression, its manifestation, its symptoms, its the details of it. Hu helam legabe mashpia. This is concealed by the mashpia. The question is, why is it concealed? The mashpia seemingly has both, etzem and ispashtus. The makabel only has ispashtus. And from there, he travels to the etzem. So he explains the next line. She'ena tefes mokum klal legabe hagili ha'atzmi. Why is it a helam by the mashpia? Because it doesn't carry any weight. It doesn't carry any value. When you know the core of the idea, even though it's important to express it, going back to the Ragat Shavar, once you know the fundamental concept that Torah is teaching us about Zman, or about Koyach and Poel, potential and actual, so the detail, how it manifests, does not have any, I don't want to say no value. It's insignificant compared to the core idea. Because you know the core. Now it's a question of a matter of how to explain it in different manners. I just want to qualify. This does not mean that the halacha, detailed halacha, is not important. It just means when you're talking about the core central idea, once a mashpia comes to understand the core essence of an idea, he basically has the problem solved. Now it's a question of breaking it down into the details and showing how it expresses itself. So again, when Einstein or other great scientists came up with some epiphany that could answer a dilemma or a complex issue that no one was able to explain, or many issues. So it's true, sometimes the theory at the time was not yet even proven. We know many things Einstein said. At some point, people thought it was not wrong, and then it was proven years later. Different things. Why? Because the theory was there. The etzem, he got the idea. He just didn't yet either he didn't yet observe it, or he didn't yet express it in a particular form and fashion. And this is very common. Someone comes up with a concept to solve a dilemma in any given situation in business. You come up with a new product, a new concept, a new idea. It doesn't mean you have it fleshed out yet, but once you have that, that's the main gili by you. The details that will come down to is not tefes mokim at that point, because compared to the intensity of the core essence, it's not considered tefes mokim, which of course is a key word here, because we're soon going to go back to oyer not being tefes mokim, which is of course the uchamhu. But let's not jump. Okay.
Can we ask a question right now?
Yeah, go ahead.
We're talking about how the Makabel sees the detail, not how the Mashpia sees the detail. Is that correct?
It depends who you're talking about. You're talking about when the Makabel sees the details, it's how the Makabel sees the details. There's how the Mashpia sees the details as well.
That's what I'm asking.
So which one you're talking about? You're talking about right now, this line?
Yes, in other the Mashpia.
This line, yeah, he's saying that why is what's begili by the Makabel, which is the Ispashtus, the extension of the idea, the way the teacher is explaining the details, let's see, to his recipient, to his student. So by the Mashpia, that's considered a helam because it's not tefes mokim by him, the details, compared to the essential core of the idea.
That's the essential question, though. Does the Mashpia not see the central core idea in the detail that he's telling the Makabel?
Maybe he does, but still, what by him, what radiates most, what's most powerful is the central core. It's like sometimes you see there's a brilliant teacher says a line, and then he says, let one of my students explain that line. Once he said it, he said the core idea. Now it's a matter of unpacking it. Basically, unpacking a core essential idea is not tefes mokim as much as the actual core essential idea. By the recipient, the other way around. All he has is the unpacking of the details.
That's why it sounds like when we're talking about when the recipient gets it, then it's definitely ukam. Not a question.
We didn't get to ukam here, so I don't want to jump until the Frierdiker Rebbe himself is going to explain it. There's no reason to guess. We're going to read it now inside.
Okay, thank you.
We're using I mean, a few lines ago, we used the expression that it's hidden. It's a helam to the mashpia.
He just explained what helam means.
It seems a less.
Helam means it's not tefes mokim. It means it's
not important.
It's almost a distraction, frankly, in a way.
Gotcha. I just wanted to be sure.
He said that right here. Helam legaba mashpia. Not before, right here he says it. 4 lines from the bottom. She'enei tefes mokim klal legabe hagili ha'atzmi. The gili ha'atzmi, the revelation of that core idea, as I said, is so powerful that the unpacking of that idea in details is not tefes mokim. It's insignificant from the perspective of the mashpia's core idea. Now, there's another discussion that by explaining the details to a student, he himself gets enriched. But that's not relevant to what we're discussing right now. Okay, we will talk about that later. Okay. Im Kain, I'm 3 lines from the bottom on page 116. Im Kain, hariklolis hafsharis shalamakabel. The general capacity of the recipient, be'inyan kabbalas ha'asaga v'askola, in the manner of where he receives the comprehension and the conception. Hine legabe ha'atzmi the mashpia, compared to the atzmi, that's by the mashpia. Hainu k'moishu ba'atzmai. How do you read? Legabe ha'atzmi the mashpia, hainu k'moishu ba'atzmai. Mekabel la'atzmai nechshav kedugmas hachesh legabe. I assume he means, so, therefore, the capacity of the recipient in receiving the idea compared to the atzmi of the mashpia as it is in the mashpia, shehu ba'atzmei, mekabel la'atzmei. I think he means how the mashpia has that atzmi within himself. So by the mekabel, all this, that atzmi is nechshav bedugmas, kedugmas hacheshech legabe'er. It's compared, for example, like darkness compared to light. Because he just said it's a helam legabe ha-makabel. The atzmi by the mashpia is a helam legabe makabel because he doesn't have any connection to it. He has no way to, like he said, no handle to grasp it. My concern is I'm trying to wonder what the words makabel la'atzmi means. You know, legabe ha'atzmi, the mashpia, hainu kameshu ba'atzmi. Unless he means by the makabel, that the makabel, what he receives for himself, the ishpashtus, in other words, the fact that he receives the details, so those details compared to the atzmi of the mashpia is compared to darkness, compared to light. Either way, I'm not positive. The hainu kamoishu ba'atzmei is the who referred to the mashpia or to the makabel. Let me read it again. Yeah, I correct myself. What I said now is accurate. I read it wrong. He's saying like this. So based on what we just said, let's just spell it out. The recipient receives the details. From there, he can travel to reach the Nakuda, the Etzem, but that's not where he is right now. The mashpia, the other way around. The mashpia starts with the etzem, the atzmi, and moves toward the details. So now he's saying, so based on this, the capacity of the recipient to receive the seichel from the mashpia compared to the atzmi of the mashpia. So how the recipient is on his own, how he's receiving the details from the mashpia, all that nechshav is compared to example, like darkness compared to light. So even though from the makabel's perspective,
I don't think so.
Okay, 1 second. Let me finish explaining it my way, and then you can go and give another approach. So from the makabel's perspective, it's a gilui, because he's receiving information. Aleph, Beis, Gimel. If you talk about a child, if you talk about a little even more advanced student, he's receiving details. So it's a gilui. But the atzmi of the mashpia in this gilui is really, for the point of view of the makabel, it's cheshech legabe er. Why? Because he has no connection to the etzem at this point in his career, in his life. Right now, all he's receiving is pratim, and like he said, the atzmi is therefore concealed from him. So it's called cheshech. He's building the case why Kesed is going to be called Cheshech compared to Ilis HaIlis. So I'm reading it that the Hainu Kameshu Ba'asmei, Makabala Atzmei, that it's referring to the Makabal. First, I thought it was referring to Mashpia, but I reading it again, it seems to me it's referring to the Makabal.
I think it's the Mashpia. I think
well,
I'm not.
You're going to have to explain the words, all the words, in
Okay.
very poshut to Asis. I could not find a way of explaining this line when you talk about the mashpia. Makabel, kamoishu ba'atzmei, that I was able to explain with the mashpia. But makabel atzmei did not sound to me, sounds like the mashpia. So, b'kitzur,
The Mashpia.
if you can explain kamoishu ba'atzmei, makabel atzmei on the mashpia, by all means, go ahead.
הנה לגבי עצמי דמשפיע, היינו, what is the עצמי דמשפיע? כמוי שהוא בעצמוי מקבל לעצמוי. כמו שהוא בעצמו, the way that the משפיע is מקבל לעצמו. Your explanation is good,
I
but
said that first. I did say that first, but when I read it again, it sounds more to me that it's referring to the makabel. The truth is, you could say it both, and it doesn't change pshat. Yeah, that's how I first touched it. Hainu.
doesn't change pshat. That's yeah. But he's talking here לגבי העצמי דמשפיע, and he's explaining.
But the problem is to say makabel atzme and the mashpia, you'd have to say he's talking about how the mashpia is receiving the etzem of the idea. I think it's a little confusing language. Anyway, bottom line is,
כמו שהוא בעצמו is not enough of you.
one second, one second. Let me finish what I have to say. So bottom line is like this. Regardless, it's definitely cheshach legabe the atzmi compared to the makabel. This line you can learn both ways. You could either say it's referring to the mashpia or the makabel. I think it fits more saying is the makabel, but you could also say according to mashpia. I'm not going to disagree. You can learn both ways. Fine. Resolved.
We're still talking about how it's received.
There's a bigger reason. There's a deeper reason. One second. Why I'm leaning toward makabel, because I don't understand what the Rebbe, the Frierdiker Rebbe, is trying to add here. He already said that the atzmei mashpia is on a higher level. Why does he have to say mashahu ba'atzmei makabel atzmei? Whereas if you say it's referring to the makabel, then you say very simple that the seichel is coming to him. It's a gilui for him, but in context of his own relationship with the idea that's being conveyed, mashu ba'atzmei makabel la'atzmei, mashu ba'atzmei makabel la'atzmei, that which the makabel is receiving for himself. In that world, the atzmi is cheshach legabe er. That's where then the line fits into the Havana. To say that it's referring to the mashpia, it gets to a point of what is he coming to add? Why do we need to know this? Obviously, the atzmi is by the mashpia. But again, reading it a few times, you could interpret it that way too. I'm not negating it. I'm just telling you why I'm leaning that it means the makabel, because it flows better that way. On the other hand, to be very honest, when you say hainu, usually it's an explanation of the line before, the words before. But so hainu, according to saying it's makabel, you'd have to say hainu goes back to the beginning. Klolos of shorish makabel be'inyan kabolos hasoga. The truth is, you could interpret it both ways. Again, I lean that as the makabel. Okay, enough about that. You want to ask something? Yecheskel, you wanted to say something or not?
Yeah, it's still talking. It's still talking about it's not toughest makkah. We're not talking about how the makabel has it. We're just saying it's still insignificant.
Where did you see the word tefes makom now? We already read tefes makom before. Right now, we're talking about something else. We're talking that it's called cheshech compared to oyer. The atzmi of the mashpia is considered to be like darkness compared to the light. The light, the gilui of the makabel. So that which is begili by the mashpia is helam by the makabel, and the opposite is true as well. And now he's going to come back and explain how it applies to keser and uchamhu.
I heard what you said, and I could see that also, but I don't know. It seems to me that the makabel atzma is talking about the mashpia, but.
Okay, I said to you that both are possible, and I gave you my reasons why I think it's referring to the makabel, but I have no problem if I'm wrong. It could be mashpia, it could be, yeah, I don't, it doesn't change the pshat in the thing, it's just a question of how it flows, but it's fine. Okay, but let's now conclude the whole concept was brought, because if you remember, he said a few things at the last page, which we'll go back to now. He said that ucham does not mean choshech mamish. It just means that it's compared to cheshach, which is the antithesis of light. And he also said that it's not just the absence of light, it's actually a state of the opposite of light. So here we're going to explain now what this means. The zehu, and now he's actually coming back to the language in Ayin Beis and explaining what's said on the top of the previous page. Remember, the whole idea began because you explained the first level of bittul of oir, that oir, because it's connected, davuk, and it feels the core essence of atzmus. I'm sorry. It senses atzmus, its source. Therefore, it's completely bottled. And he gave the mimer of keser elyon, kisri la, ucham hu. That was the example. So now he's going to explain the ucham, and then we're going to go back to oir. So if it's zehu, ucham hu kodam ilas ha'ilas. And this is the meaning. When we said that the supernal keser, ucham is dark, is black. Hu kodam, in the presence of or before, in contrast to ilas ha'ilas. Be'erech, he said before, be'erech to ilas ha'ilas. So keser on its own, the example here is like the makabel. But on its own, the makabel, not in the presence of his mashpia. It's a very high level of oir. He called oir kadmen, oir tzach, oir metzuchtzach. That's keser. But kodam ilas ha'ilas now introduce the mashpia into the picture. What happens to keser? So he says, she'ena nechshav la'ir. Now it's not nechshav, it's not considered light. Even though it's called oir kadmen, oir tzach, metzuchtzach. It's not just light. It's called very high levels of light. Yet, kodam ilas ha'ilas, it's compared to ucham. Because the makabel, in the presence of the mashpia, where the atzmi radiates, that atzmi is in a state of ucham compared to keser. So keser, if you talk about what keser is, it's a makabel that's receiving a lot of light. It's a very high level of gili, but it's still a makabel. In the presence of its mashpia, where the atzmi is dominant, from the point of view of keser, keser does not see the atzmi. It's completely concealed. Keser doesn't have a way. Keser may recognize it. That's why it's ucham. So keser darkens. Not to say that keser is darkness, fundamental darkness. That's not what he's saying. It's relative darkness. But it's darkness. It's not just the absence of light. Because atzmi is not there. And keser sees the extension of light, not the essence of light. That's essentially what he's saying here. Ukamoi shiraga betira, like a candle in the bright daylight or the bright sunlight. Tira means brightness, of course. So here he's using shiraga betira. Now, interestingly, shiraga betira was used by the Ayin Beis. But the Frierdiker Rebbe went through this whole discussion before he introduced that mashal. Like a flame, like a candle in this bright daylight. The Eir HaNeir, the light of the candle, mizbat legabe Eir HaShemesh. It gets nullified in contrast, in comparison to the light of the sun. That's shiraga batira. Ad she'eina nechshav le'er, to the point that it's not even considered to be light. Not considered. It doesn't say it's not light. It's not considered light because in the presence of such a powerful light, this candle is not considered to be light. Ukanal, like we learned earlier, the Rebbe in the note says chapter 6. So we're going back a long way in Tzaddik Dalet, chapter 6. Now in chapter 25. The Ein zeh she'ein er haner klal. That shirag does not mean there's no er haner. You're not saying that the candle disappeared. You don't say it completely disappeared. It was annihilated. Ein zeh she'ein er haner klal. The haner delig b'yem, k'moishru delig b'layla. A candle is lit by day, just like it's lit by night. When you light a candle by day, it's not like nothing happened. You lit a candle, but you can't call it light. And by night, you can call it light. Ki'im shalagabe er hashemesh. Rather, we're saying not that it's not there, that it doesn't exist as a candle. But compared to the er hashemesh, the light of the sun, ein zeh me'inyan er klal. It's not in the category of light. You wouldn't even call it a light. And that's why it doesn't have any value. It doesn't have mayahan. It doesn't serve any purpose. So interesting. When there's a dark room or it's at night and you light a candle, it absolutely serves a purpose. It's light. Without it, you wouldn't be able to see in a dark room or in the dark outside. What was light by night By day is if you said what is the category called light? By day is candle called light? No, it's not called light. It's a candle. It's lit. It exists. But to call it light, no, because it doesn't serve in any way. It will not illuminate anything for you in the face and the backdrop of a bright sunlight or bright daylight. So that which is Ayin on one level is Hemshech on another level. And again, not just the absence of light, it's Hemshech because it's not Inyan ha'Ayin. Ayin Inyan is Inyan Gilui. Remember how much the Frierdiker Rebbe kept saying. Ayin is Gilui. And a candle, as much as it's a candle by day, it's not, you can't call it Gilui. It's not really revealing anything. Now, if you want to ask, what about when you, let's say it's a bright sun and you want to reach and see in a certain crevice or corner and you light a candle? Okay, because the sun is not reaching there. The light is not there. That's not the point. The point then the candle has value. But you see that on one level is Hemshech on another level. So you can use the word ucham, not just heder ha'ir. Because you could say again that Kesser is nullified. But you're saying it's not even considered light once you have the sunlight. Once the atzmi of the mashpia is there, that's a Hemshech from the point of view of Kesser. So in the example, the physical example, you're not talking about atzmi. You're just saying that the light of the candle in the middle of the day is not from the Geder Ur. It doesn't have any Ur quality of Gili. It's not revealing anything. Some places in Chassidus it says it even darkens. If you look at a candle in the middle of a bright daylight, you actually see a shadow. It's like a darker light. It's not as bright as the bright, so it actually is a darker state. He doesn't mention that here. Maybe it's not relevant here, but that does say that in some places. In the language of Ruchnius, the point is that Kesser, in the face of Ilus ha'ilus, meaning in the face of Atzmi, where the Atzmi radiates, in the Mashpia, not that Ilus ha'ilus is the Atzmi. Ilus ha'ilus is the Mashpia, the cause of causes, where the Mashpia connects to the Etzem of the idea. That Etzem is Hemshech from the point of view of the Makabel.
Rabbi Jacobson, didn't we say earlier?
Hold on. One second.
Oh.
Hemshech, because he doesn't. 1 second. Let me just see 1 second. Because he cannot grasp it. He can't in any way. He doesn't have a handle to grasp it. 1 second. Yeah, what were you asking?
Didn't we say in our discussion earlier when we were discussing Yesh Miti and Yesh Ayin, Yesh Nivra and Ayin Be'emsa, didn't we say that the ore carries the etzem in it? So doesn't Kesser have the atzmus, etzem within it? So therefore it would be some type of revelation within Kesser as it's manifested in Kesser.
First of all, we spoke about not Kesser. Kesser is not the level of Ein Sof Lifnei Tzimtzum. Kesser is a level that exists already, Kesser of Atzilus, or Kesser, even Kesser HaKloli, Ak, or other levels of Kesser. That's number one. Number two, even when and we're going to learn that is not Tefes Smokim, is like compared to Etzem, the only reason it carries Etzem, not because has any qualities, because it's bottle. When something is bottle, it can carry something that it itself does not even have. So, for example, if the Makabel was bottled to the Mashpia, he can carry ideas that he himself doesn't understand yet because he's bottled. But that's not because he relates to it. We're talking about Gilui now. Gilui means that the Makabel relates to the Etzem. We're not talking about whether he can carry it or not. If he's bottled, he can carry anything. That's the second point. But the main point is that we're talking about Kesser here, and we're going to soon talk about and it's two different sides. We talked about this at length. I gave long class about this 2 days ago, about On one hand, is completely, infinitely distant from the Etzem, but because of its bittul, it can carry the Etzem. But carrying the Etzem and relating to the Etzem is not the same thing. Here we're talking about relating to the Etzem. The Makabel does not relate to the Etzem because he's only focused on the details, and the Mashpia relates to the Etzem. In this case, Ilus ha'ilus. But let's continue. He's going to talk about in a minute. We're going to get back to shortly. And again, you have to always keep in mind that there's two sides to every coin here. There's what the Eibishter is, Atzmus is, and Oyer, and Kesa, and all these levels. And then there's what we, through Avodah, or what the Eibishter allows things to flow from one to the other. But that does not make anything ever Atzmi. There's only one Atzmus, will always remain only one God. There will never be more than one God, God forbid. Though that things can be a keli to godliness. Okay, ukanal. Oh, I said that already. Kim shaligabe Hashem is ein zemin yaka. V'zehu kol nuhuroyin mischashchoyin kamei. Remember the second statement on the top of last page, that all the lights are darkened before it, before him. Hare keda eisen nuhuroyin. You're not saying they are fundamental darkness. You're calling them lights. Kol nuhuroyin. All the lights are darkened before him. So you're calling it light. Just like we said with the candle. It's light. I'm sorry, it exists. The Eir exists. It just doesn't have the light element of Gili in the presence of a higher level. And here he says, he calls them lights. Shehem b'chinas Oyer. They are the level of Oyer. Ela shekamei. However, when you talk kamei before him, meaning before a higher level, before higher levels of Oyer, hey mischashchoyin, they get darkened. The eina me'inyan er klal. Compared to him, they're not at all from even the inyan of Oyer. They're not in that category. They're darkened before him. Valderech, heder tfisis mokim hakotten legabe hagodl. Like the lack of standing or any inner value or of a cotton of something smaller compared to something greater. She'enet tefes mokim klal ba'atzmei. That when a smaller wise person stands before a greater one, he's not tefes mokim klal ba'atzmei. He feels completely nullified in the presence of something greater than him. Hine kemoi kain. So all this now, the same now is regarding Ba'er, who Ba'er hadovuk ba'etzem, the Eir that is attached to the etzem. Hine mitzad hergish ha'atzmus, due to the fact that it feels and senses atzmus, the core, essence. The Eir does, the Eir feels it. Harium is battle ba'atzmusei. Fundamentally at the core gets completely, this atzmus is the atzmus of the Eir, gets bottled because it senses atzmus. She'ena tefes mokim ba'atzmei klal. They doesn't sense any, there's no sense of any self. V'zehu, and this is the first eifan habitl. V'zehu, the eifan bitl ha'Eir, hu be'eifan habitl the head at tefes mokim. And this is the meaning, that the manner of the bitl, this is the first level of bitl, is a bitl of not having any standing, any value, because it is connected to and feels the presence of something greater than it. Like keser compared to ilis ha'ilis, like the cotton compared to the gadol, like the makabel compared to the mashpia. And what the Frierdiker Rebbe adds, that does not say in Ayin Beis, is an explanation why it's called ucham. How can you call it a lack of oil altogether? Darkness. Not just that lack, not just an absence of light, darkness. So he gave the example because atzmi is completely qualitatively different level. So when you sense that there's something beyond you in that level, it's not just the mashpia is greater than you are. Then it's a bitl, but it's not complete nullification, not complete darkness, let's call it that way. Here, the Eir would be considered darkness because the etzem is darkened before it, and therefore does not have any element of, like he said, it doesn't have any way to relate to this etzem, so it's bottle, and the other way around as well. From the etzem's point of view, what the Eir is not tefes mokim at all, because it's only details, and details are like a helam compared to the etzem. Though he doesn't spell out both ways, here the main focus is how the makabel looks at it, how the Eir is experiencing hedet tefes mokim. Like we said, it's not just how atzmus sees the Eir, 1 second. It's not just how Atzmus sees the Eir. Let me just look here. Yeah, the Eir itself feels that level of Ayin. So this is a level of bittul, a bittul that you yourself may be a level of light on your own, but in the presence of that which is greater than you, in this case, in the presence of the Eir, the etzem of the Eir, the Atzmus, the source of it, it's considered, it's completely nullified to the point of dark, to the point of, the point that it doesn't sense in itself any value. But remember, keep this in mind, later we're going to learn, this is only when it's in the presence and feels its source. If it didn't feel its source, if it would be kesed on its own, not kodem ilis ilis, for example, then the Eir is very powerful light. It's just because of the source, that's what nullifies it. Okay. So that concludes this chapter. If anybody wants to ask anything or comment, please do. Now
You
is a
said
good
it.
time.
Einoi me'inyan hagilui klal. That's what he said. That's
Exactly right.
like Shrago b'tiharo, it's a candle, it's light, but Gabi, oil hashemesh, it's einoi me'inyan hagilui. Like he said before, ein pirushem choshech mamesh. It's not choshech, but compared to that, it's einoi me'inyan hagilui.
Okay. You're asking something, you're just repeating it. Good. That's correct.
No. It's the way that you explained it. He's saying it.
Yeah.
It's not choshech, but compared to that, it's einoi me'inyan hagilui.
Yeah, but he calls it ucham as well. And mishchash choyin.
That's why it's called ucham, because einoi me'inyan hagilui. Afal pi it's nehoirin. The ucham means that it's not gilui. It's not choshech.
Yeah, but the point here is that it's also not the absence of light alone. It actually is compared to cheshach. It's compared to total darkness because it's completely concealed from it, he says. Kedugmas hacheshach legabe eir. So, yes, it's correct. It's not, it on its own, without the presence of the source, it is light. But in the presence of the source, it's not just the absence of light, it's actually considered to be dark.
Okay.
Why? Because the Atzmi, by the Makabel, is the example he gave, because the Atzmi is completely beyond the Makabel.
Yeah.
So that's the second side of it. So both are correct. Okay.
But Rabbi Jacobson, if the or is in front of the Atzmi and it's not in the getter klal, the two are totally different. Atzmus is not, or can't be in front of Atzmus if it's totally different getter. So how could it become like darkness in front of the or in front of the etzem when it's not even comparable? It can't even stand in front of the etzem. It can't have a relationship with etzem because it's so far removed.
First of all, who says it can't? God wants it to exist. God emanated light. The light on its own, it's like a student in front of a teacher. He's there, but he's completely nullified.
But that would be when the teacher is revealed as a teacher. But what about etzem, where he's even beyond the level of teacher, which the student never gets to experience? The teacher as a teacher, not as a teacher, but as a person, so to speak, beyond being just a teacher. Which is, I thought that was the level we were talking about. Is that not the level we're talking about? We're talking about a lower level when or this light can stand before it, whereas I thought there was a level that it can't even, has no shaykhus to it, so to speak.
The question you're asking is the next chapter in the Maimer here.
Oh, okay.
He's going to ask this question directly himself.
Oh yeah, okay.
In Ayin Beis, we already learned that he asked this question, he gives a whole answer. So the next full chapter is just on this topic itself. That
Sure.
he's going to ask exactly this question. That you could say Eir is bottle when it feels a higher level of Eir, but how do you compare it to Atzmi?
Right.
He's going to ask exactly this question.
Okay, thank you.
And when we learned Ayin Beis, I don't know if you were to listen to those classes, we already learned this. He asked the question and then answered it. So we're going to learn it now in chapter 26 here.
Is the answer from the Frierdiker Rebbe going to be different than the
No. Everything
I-
here is from Ayin Beis. Everything here is an elaboration of Ayin Beis. Nothing is different.
Okay.
It only develops it further and at some points goes into a whole new subject. But it's not different. This is, I actually even marked it up. This is Ayin Beis with additions, basically. He actually quotes entire section. This is like rewriting Ayin Beis with the Frierdiker Rebbe's additions.
Okay.
You guys want to continue to the next chapter? We want to stop here. So
Pressure, let's go a little bit more. We can at
Okay.
least, you know.
But now, if you remember in Ayin Beis, I'm just going to refer to the pages. So what we learned right now was basically 1155 in Ayin Beis, Aleph Kuf Nun Hey. The first half of the page. Not even. The Frierdiker Rebbe's whole page here explains was essentially 15 lines in Ayin Beis. From Omnam Masha Kosov till Teifus Mokim Batzmi. If you have Ayin Beis open, it's around 15 lines. 3, 6, 9, 12. Actually, 12 lines. So all this is the first 12 lines of page 1155, in the second paragraph, 1155. Now Ayin Beis goes to a question. And the Frierdiker Rebbe is going to elaborate on this question. And the question briefly is going to be that all this makes sense if you were talking about one level of air compared to a higher level of air. So yes, a candle compared to a sun, a makabel compared to a mashpia, a smaller chacham compared to a greater chacham, wiser one, keser compared to ilus ha'ilus, oir compared to higher levels of oir. But we're talking here about oir and etzem. And oir and etzem don't have that type of relationship. So his question is going to be, how do we say Heder Tfisas Mokim? Heder Tfisas Mokim means I feel and sense someone greater than me. So even though I may be a great teacher myself, but in the presence of my master, I become quiet, I become nullified, I become even darkened because I can't relate to his etzem, to the atzmi within his seichel, like we learned. But when you're talking about atzmos, like he's going to say, how do you say Heder Tfisas Mokim? Tfisas Mokim, it means that there's something in common, but one overshadows the other, completely overshadows, even to the point that it's not even Geder Er. It's like the student would say, compared to my teacher, whatever I teach is actually dark, not even light, for the reasons we discussed. So that's going to be the question. Omnam Sarech Lahavin. Interesting, in the Ayin Beis, he just uses the word v'hagam, and though. That becomes, by the Frierdiker Rebbe, Omnam Tzarech Lahavin, a full-blown question. When we learned Ayin Beis, I remember I pointed out that it seems to be a question, and it was a question, but sometimes the Frierdiker Rebbe Rashab, it says v'hagam, and though the Eir and the Etzim are apart, and then he goes into the question and answers it. Here, far more stark, far more glaring that this is a obvious question. He says, Omnam, Tzarech Lahavin, we have to understand. However, we have to understand. Eichev Shelevayir, how can you explain that bittul the ayin, that the bittul of the ayin, remember the ayin is the ayin between the yesh and the yesh. In this case, we're talking about the ayin of the yesh amiti, oir. Hainu ha-bittul, hainu the bittul oir. How can you say and explain that the bittul of oir that we just said, hine eifn ha-bitlu ba'eifn the head that fishes smokim, that the manner of this nullification is in a form of lack of value, lack of standing. The halo yedua, the bittul the head that fishes smokim, shayach rak ba'hagiluim v'loi ba'atzmos. Isn't it known that the bittul of lack of standing or lack of value is shaykh only in Giluyim? In Giluyim, you could say one level does not have any significance compared to a higher level. V'loi ba'atzmos, not in atzmos. And he's going to explain what that means. The question. The bittul the head that tfisas mokim, this bittul of lack of standing or lack of feeling any sense of space, that's like a tfisas mokim means I don't feel any value. Hudafka de hakodesh ha'afla. That is, it is explicitly only when there's a recognition of the grandeur or the wonder of something greater than you are. The concept of hakaras haflah, which means to recognize the wonder or recognize the awesomeness or the grandeur. I mean, there are a lot of words for haflah, but basically you're recognizing something far greater than you are. He says that's only shaykh in gili such a recognition. The cotton mizbatel legabe gili godle mimenu, that a smaller light is nullified or is mizbatel, nullified compared to a greater light that's greater than it. Shual derech habitl the chacham cotton legabe chacham gadol. That's al derech, the bitl, the nullification of a smaller chacham in the legabe compared to a greater chacham, greater wise one. This nullification is only possible, this sense of lack of self, complete feeling, feeling no standing, no significance, is only when the chacham cotton, the smaller chacham, yedeya, is aware of the haflas chachmas shel chacham gadol, the grandeur or the wonder or the power of the greater chacham. She'oz dafkum is batel legabe. Dafka, when he's aware, then he's nullified before it. Sharim any yedeya klal haflas chachmasei. Let's for a moment assume that he was not aware. Let's say a child, is in the presence of a great, great genius. He's not even aware who he's standing there. I don't just mean physically. I mean, he's not aware of the quality of this person's intelligence. Einim is batel klal. It won't be nullified at all because he's not aware. So why would he be nullified? It's due to awareness. Kim kasha yedeya haflos the gedel chachmasei. It's rather only when he knows the aflaw of the gedel chachmasei, the wonder and the greatness of his intelligence or wisdom. Ozum is battle beheaded tfisas mokim ba'atzmei. Then he gets nullified because he feels, in that presence of something so great, he feels himself completely insignificant. Asher kamoy kein hu lamaila. This is how it is lamaila. Going back to the Maimer Zayar. The Kisrei law, ucham hu kodem ilas ilas. What is the statement? That Kisrei law, the supernal, the higher keser, ucham hu is darkened, kodam, before in the presence of, compared to the cause of causes. Shakavanahu al gili er hakav b'chlal. The kavana of this statement, what's ilas ilas? So Chassidus is teaching is that is the gili hakav. So keser compared to the kav, which is the ray of light, the original ray and thread of light that came from after the tzimtzum, connected to the hagadol, the igul hagadol before the tzimtzum. So a stream of light, which compared to lifnei tzimtzum, it's only a narrow kav. I'm sorry, dak kav dak kav chud dak v'kotzer is the expression. It's a line and a thread that's narrow and short, or thin and short light. But compared to the lower levels, a nishtalshlus, everything, the kav is the most intense of all. Everything comes, it's the original light after the tzimtzum. So the keser, compared to the kav, he's saying, the er hakav ub'chinas gili er, the er hakav is the state of gili er. So keser, legabe the gili hakav, is uchamhu. Again, we're talking about because they're both in the same league. They're both er. Therefore, the keser, which is er, recognizes a greater er. That's all possible. In other words, hedet tfisas mokim is contingent on awareness and having something in common. It doesn't use the word in common, so I don't want to use that word. But basically, you're aware. If you weren't aware, there wouldn't be any bit like that. Ubigiluyim hine er kotem is batel legabe er nailam amenu. And in Giluyim, that's the rule. A lower light or a lesser light will be nullified compared to a light that is greater than it. So going back to the question now, that's all in Giluyim. Hedet tfisas mokim. The lack of standing, the lack of value, insignificance, nullification, everything we discussed. Avala atzmus is baruch, but atzmus, blessed be he, Hu l'mayla mebchinas gili. He's higher than the gili altogether. Atzmus is not the gather of gili. It's not one gili higher than another gili. V'im kain, and here's the question. How is it possible to say that the bittul of the the gaba atzmus, is in this case of nullification of not feeling any standing or any significance? The haloi called bittul shebchinas head tfisas mokum v'rakal yedei yediyas hafla. As we said before, isn't it the case that every bittul that's in the case of that feels of in a form of nullification or lack of standing and significance is only through knowing the hafla? You have to be aware of that, of the wonder of the level above you. And that yediyah of hafla is only possible in the level of Gilead. Yediyas hafla, to know the hafla. Atzmus is not in that gather altogether. It's only in Gilead, not in Atzmus. That's the question. Now, the immediate question I have when you hear this question, you say, why not? Fine, Atzmus is not beged the Gili, but why cannot the Eir sense that itself, that Atzmus is not beged the Gili? It's also a flaw. It's also a wonder. It's true, it's not the same thing like a smaller scholar compared to a greater scholar, or a flame compared to the sunlight, or like he said, in all the levels, Kesser compared to the Kav. But why can't I say that Oyer, because it senses that the Eibishter, it recognizes that the God is beyond Gili, and that's what causes the bittul. So, but Pasha is the answer. Why my question is not a question, is because it's not that gather of Tfisas Mokim. Then you would say something else, that the Oyer is altogether not in that realm. Head of Tfisas Mokim means that I am light, but in the presence of Atzmus, I'm like darkness or not light. But here we're not talking about that. If you're talking about that level, then it's not a different type. You wouldn't call it head of Tfisas Mokim. It should be called some other type of bittul. That's what Pasha is what I think he's saying. Or even better, the whole concept of bittul seems to be only possible when you're talking in Giluyim. With Atzmus, Atzmus is everywhere. Atzmus is not closer to light or more distant from light. So the whole thing doesn't make sense. So then Atzmus is as distant from Atzmus as Yesh is, as we're going to learn soon. So the question is, how do you call it the head that Tfisas Mokum, which means there has to be something in common between the two. Just some thoughts. Even though we had learned it already, I'm just thinking about it again. Anybody wants to comment on this?
I had the same question, and your answer is at least the first step of the answer. Maybe there is more than that. I don't know.
I mean, the answer he's going to give in the Maimer is a different. He's going to say Oyer has something indeed that is not b'bchinas richuk from Atzmus, because Oyer doesn't have anything but his Megala Atzmus. That's going to be his answer ultimately, which we learned already in Ayin Beis. Here he's going to elaborate more. So clearly, maybe what I'm answering is what he's going to ultimately answer. But the fact of the matter is, I have to think about it more. I want to think about it some more. But Al Kapon, that's what he said. We're going to stop here by the question because the answer is already more elaborate and not so short as well. Okay, good. So let's stop here, middle of page 117. And we'll continue. We'll continue tomorrow.